their different perspectives on education. Also, just to be on the lookout from Furman University, we will be having events coming up in March and April. Along with that, we'll be taking different field trips to places across the community. So if you would like more information about Furman University, please just come talk to myself, either Jason Farrell, Michelle Cody, David Brown, Julia Louise Doe, or Josh Russell. This CLP was co-hosted with Ola and also with Kappa Alpha Psi. So without further ado, I would like to call up Dr. Paul.
I'm okay. How's everybody doing today?
Mike's not on, Jason.
Can you hear me now?
Nope.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right, so today's discussion is entitled Redefining Our Perspectives on Education. So just to give you some background information about it. In 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois saw the problem of the color line as the main problem of the 20th century. And despite enormous changes in equality between race and ethnicity, it's still a leading U.S. domestic problem of the 21st century. However, today we face wider disparities between not only race and ethnicity, but gender and socioeconomic status. So today's discussion will be moderated by Avery Martin. He's a local Greenville native. He's a teacher, a mentor, and an educator. Basically, we're going to look at some of the inequalities within the South Carolina school system and see how we can kind of figure some of these out. Without further ado, here's Avery Martin.
Good evening. Tonight, before we start, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give us a brief introduction of themselves and kind of tell us what they do. So we're going to start on my far left with Dr. Paul Thomas.
I'm Paul Thomas. I'm an associate professor of education here at Furman, and I've been here for 10 years. And before that, I taught 18 years at Woodruff High School. I was a high school English teacher and a soccer coach. Most of my work focuses on literacy, but a lot of my work also focuses on poverty and how it impacts education and the politics around that situation.
Hello, I'm Pranita Hudson. I graduated from here last May. I got a degree in political science, bachelor's arts, and basically my focus is just education policy. Right now I'm taking online classes to Northwestern and I'll be moving in June there.
Hello, I'm Richard Dawkins. I'm Community Affairs Coordinator at Greenville Technical College. I'm also the academic coach for the Call Me Mr. program, and I'm an advisor for our African American Male Leadership Institute.
Muy buenas noches. Good evening. I'm Lee Serrata McElveen. I'm with the South Carolina Commission for Minority Affairs. I'm the Hispanic Affairs Coordinator for the state. And one of my roles is to look at, well, the commission focuses on poverty and deprivation and the contributing factors to that. And of course, we know education is a component of that. So one of the things we do is look at what are the challenges that the Hispanic community has in terms of education in our state. So that's one of the things that I do in my job across the state is look at what are the challenges in this area.
Good evening. I am Leola Robinson Simpson. I serve on the Greenville County School Board. This year marks my 16th year on the board. I serve District 25, which is probably the highest poverty district within the school district of Greenville County. It lies off Augusta Road, White Horse Road, just short of going into the Berea area. And I take pride, great pride in being a strong, vocal advocate for the needs of poor and disadvantaged children in our district. And I feel proud to have done that for the past 16 years. This is my last year on the school board. I announced a couple of years ago that I didn't plan to run. Nobody signed up, and I ended up serving an additional 4 years. But I believe we'll have some good candidates on board when the election takes place in November. I want to add that after 4 years on the board, when the Greenville News ran a piece on the shameful disparities between African-American students in the school district of Greenville County and their counterparts. I took the initiative to form a nonprofit organization called the Center for Educational Equity. That group is now within its 12th year in Greenville County. What we've done through the years, we've provided success opportunities for poor and disadvantaged students and their parents. Parents need strong advocates too, because so many people will say that parents don't care, poor parents aren't involved, they don't care what their children do, and that is the biggest fallacy that has ever been told. So I take great pride in working with wonderful parents. Our students cross the gamut, racial, ethnicity gamut, the whole bit. Some of you may have seen a piece in the newspaper recently about a couple of boxers, USA boxers, because we have an athletic component, who went all the way from the local to the state to the regional to the national. And one of them was a young female Caucasian student who's a 9th grader at Travelers Rest High School, is one of our students, and the other student, Ernie Cuevas, the Hispanic student, won first in the nation. And we do the athletic part in addition to the academics as a bite, you know, to sort of draw the students in. So I guess for the most part, that's about me.
Well, thank you. Remember, guys, that tonight is all about not just learning, but the important part is that when we finish this discussion, the Q&A, we have to hear from you to understand your perspectives and your views as well. So just don't sit here for the next hour like, I'm just trying to get credit, then I'm going back. I've been there, I feel you. But make sure you have some questions, guys, to ask the panelists, because that's really what's going to make this ultimate discussion. That's how we get something out of these things, all right? So we have, is Mr. Gregg? All right, Mr. Gregg just showed us. So Mr. Gregg, I want you to give a brief description of what you do, please, sir, right quick, so the audience can know who you are, please, sir.
Okay, excuse my apology, I was dealing with some college issue with the student. I'm Director of Pre-College Enrollment Services for the Urban League of the Upstate. I've been in that capacity for about 6.5 years. And I started working with young people about 20 years ago in most inner cities from the West Coast to the East Coast. And I come with 17 years of experience of seeing some tough kids from some tough inner cities, 15 years of military experience working as a nuclear, chemical, biological warfare officer, and just love what I do for the community.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, so we're going to start off with a general question. And whoever wants to chime in first, please do so. But the first question is dealing with the achievement gap. In your certain areas, whether it be college, a student, or you know, whatever you work with, how do you see what is actually the achievement gap, and how is your organization trying to close that gap? Because we read statistics all the time that show us that African American students and Hispanic students in math and reading score lower on tests or not on grade level, beginning in the 4th grade, nor in the 8th grade, or in the high schools. So how can we begin to close that gap as a whole for our minority communities?
Well, I'll be glad to start because I've tried to quit using the term achievement gap. I really wish we wouldn't use the term at all. The conditions in our schools are a reflection of our society. So I try to talk about the equity gap. So first, I think we have to admit that our schools are a mirror of the inequity in our society. They're not causing it. It's like blaming the hospital for causing people to be sick. The hospital just happens to house the sick, and it does the best it can. I also think we have to confront that once students come into our schools, we don't do much about the equity gap. Our schools are also extremely inequitable. Tracking is a simple example. As long as we keep our focus on things like achievement, and generally when we talk about achievement, we're talking about test scores. So as long as we keep focusing on test scores, our schools are going to continue to reflect the equity gap and then perpetuate the inequity gap.
I'd which is comprised of different people from across the state. And one of the things that we look at when we're focusing on education is, as I mentioned earlier, is the challenges. Now, we all know, as mentioned, there are achievement gaps, very similar within the African American community, Hispanic. However, there's some uniqueness there in terms of our language barrier. And with the Hispanic community, some of those achievement gaps within our state deal a lot with, I know many of you may have heard the terms LEP, which stands for Limited English Proficiency, or you may have heard the terms ESOL, and so forth. ESOL stands for English as learners, okay, English as a second language, and these are the teachers that are within the school. So in looking at the achievement gaps, what we need to look at is what areas can we work with these students starting at an early age. And what this committee tries to do is make recommendations for our state, because sometimes we have to look at policies from the state level. What is our school system doing to assist? For example, in terms of our ESOL, which works with these students that are limited in their English proficiency, and we do not receive any state funds, just federal funds to assist. So lack of funding sometimes has to do with our achievement gaps. Now, is it always the case? Not necessarily. So we're looking at ways in which we can make policy change and then also work with the dynamics of individual schools, how teachers relate to students, the culture, understanding the culture.
I'd like to follow up. Go ahead. I'd like to follow up on that, because when we talk about the state, in our state constitution, when it comes down to education, it's minimally adequate. That's what it says. In 1895, that's what it says. I think we need to change that, and in that there's a change to be made, because if you look at our governor, you look at superintendent of education, everybody's thinking, they're not thinking about changing the overall view of education in South Carolina, and I think that's one of the problems that we have here in the state that we need to change.
I wanted to follow up on her idea of lack of funding, which for me, coming from Colleton County High School, which is along the I-95, I think it was definitely just lack of resources. I know for one thing, especially coming into Furman and feeling as though I was not on the same learning scale, just knowledgeable, just as my peers, I felt as though the resources that my school had were not shared or even brought up to our knowledge as students. Because if I feel as though if I had the knowledge of knowing what the world had to offer for me before going into college, then I would have taken a different perspective and taken more advantage of my career, my education career at Furman. I think what we can do to do that, to fix that resource issue, again, the state idea of minimally adequate, but also in certain schools, I don't know if higher income schools have it, but probably have a different perspective or a different focus in our guidance counselors when they help us do prepare for college. I think we should have a career center for students who are interested in college, so that they will have a better knowledge of what's going on in the world, what schools offer, what types of programs that are there, what types of programs that they can get into before they get into college, and things that they can help them be better prepared in high school when they do get in college.
The first thing that I feel needs to be done is that educators and the community in general needs to make a commitment, a solid commitment to level the learning field for all students. That hasn't been done. And it needs to be done because our school system operates on the premise that you can give equal treatment to unequals. And we all know that there's nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals. We have students in our school district who come to the schoolhouse gate with so many barriers. Some of them are homeless, some of them are migrants, and they're treated the same. Our school district has done a wonderful job in many, many areas, we have beautiful new schools, and I'm so proud that we've been able to do that in Greenville County. But when it comes down to serving students who have challenges, we haven't begun to do as much as we can do. Now, I'm very happy that the Department of Education this year will be reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And one of the things that they're asking for is that the best and brightest, quote unquote, teachers and principals be shared with the schools that need them the most. If that were done, I can guarantee you from my experiences and working with struggling students, you don't have to write off the ones who are in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade and just work on the ones in kindergarten. Acceleration works. It works on the elementary, secondary level, it works on the college level, and I know that from managing tutoring at Greenville Tech for over 25 years. You give me a student and I can accelerate them, and it won't take all day to do it. You know, it just takes a commitment to really open the door, give that student the key to success, format that brain for learning, and it can be done. So one of the things that I'm hoping young people in the community as well as leaders in the community will do is to begin to advocate. We've got to advocate for the needs of all children, because unless we do it, it won't get done, because unfortunately, education is political too. You hear about politics and the mainstream. Well, politics and education is just as pervasive as it is in other aspects of society. So, but with, you know, with strong advocacy from even young people coming to school board meetings and expressing yourself, and I have to give Mr. Paul credit for all the letters that he has written to the editor over the years. They make a difference as well, but those are some of the ideas.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gray, do you have anything you want to chime in?
Yes, I have to agree with the panel and Ms. Robinson. I think inequity starts with politicians where they decide where dollars are allocated, which comes in regards with resources. Having seen education across the nation and overseas, I think the entire system needs to be overhauled because it's antiquated and based on an old farming system. That's number one. Two, I think we do need to extend the school day, the school year, not the day, but the school year. Over in Korea, children go to school primarily 9 to 10 hours a day, in some cases 11 hours a day. You go to high school, you're going to college, you start school 9 o'clock in the morning, and you go until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And oh, by the way, on Saturday, when you like to sleep in, your butt got to get up and go to school a half a day to hone in on a special skill. The U.S. has fallen in terms of global readiness in education. We're no longer number 1. We slipped down to like number 12. And we have to teach young people that the competition is no longer nationally among your peers. When you walk out of college, your competition is now globally. You have to compete with everybody worldwide. But we've got to reach the masses here. We've got to deal with our kids where they are. A lot of times I think we forget. We look at home. A lot of young people are having children. They're not educated themselves. I read somewhere an article where more than half of the adults in South Carolina are considered illiterate. So you can't teach where you're not. You can only produce where you are. But we can take the resources that we have and try to force our politicians to give us more to provide the additional training that we need, recognizing the different learning style of each individual. And that's the challenge among educators today, recognizing the different learning style and how to reach each and every child.
All right, I'm glad you said that. One of the things we want to talk about also is teachers that have tenure. And so, Ms. Rosberg, I'll ask you to go further than that, and then Dr. Paul as well, whoever wants to chime in. But how do you feel about the whole tenure segment? Because a lot of teachers now who are coming out of college, who have the energy, who are motivated for change and reform, are the first ones to lose their job because they don't have tenure. So how do we begin to change this system? Because we have teachers who've been in there 20, 25 years who are just comfortable because of the system. They're not teaching. They're coming to school to get that paycheck. They don't want to change the way they're teaching. You know, they don't want to deal with Promethean boards, smart boards, anything with a computer. They just want to write on the board or or overhead and say learn. They don't want to get on the floor. They don't want to do anything. So how do we begin to change this mold of the tenured teacher to positively affect our children?
I believe we've got to come up with a better method of assessment. And assessment can't be your usual test that's given to assess the effectiveness of a teacher. I know Superintendent of Education, Zay's, offered some waivers to the new bill that's going before Congress. And one of them had to do with holding schools responsible for the progress of the students. It didn't take into consideration where the student was, how much growth the student has accomplished over time. So we've got to come up with a fair tool for assessing what's real, what has been accomplished, and what has not been accomplished. I've seen wonderful teachers who've been Teacher of the Year, penalized, and they've been put on improvement plans because, and I think it was so unfair, because they may have had a student in their class for 2 months, and if they're responsible for that student may have been in 4 different schools because of the number of times the family has moved, but yet that teacher was put on an improvement plan. Many of these teachers have been lost to us. I mean, great teachers who could relate, and it's happening, in my opinion, too often to some of our older African-American teachers. And so I think we need to come up with a fair way of assessing the effectiveness. Because I don't care who the teacher is. They can be black, white, red or green, whatever, color, whatever, ethnicity. If they can relate to the student, and if that student can move from point A to point B, that's the teacher we want. We want teachers with high energy, high expectation, but we've got to, it's not all about tenure, because the tenure part is nothing but the good old boy system. And that's what we need to get rid of, in my opinion, and we talk about it all the time. It's sort of a good old boy system. It has nothing to do with the effectiveness. So we've got to come up with some fair measures for assessing effectiveness. You might know how to do that. I'm at a loss as to how we can do it, but I think we have enough bright minds in academia, locally and across the state and nation to come up with some tools that will work.
I think it'd be important to clarify a couple of things. First, South Carolina is a non-union state. So no teacher in South Carolina has ever had a contract negotiated by a union, and there is no tenure in South Carolina for public school teachers. So if tenure is a problem with education, it doesn't make sense because South Carolina is constantly rated a low education state, and we have no unions and we have no tenure. Second, I think we need to understand what tenure actually is. In states that have tenure, tenure means academic freedom and due process. It doesn't mean a job for life. Okay, with that off the table, the next thing I think is really important is the good old boy system. This goes to something that was said a moment ago. Pesky and Haycock did a study in 2006. It's called Teaching Inequity. And throughout the country, African American students, students in poverty, English language learners, and special needs students disproportionately have new, uncertified, and undercertified teachers. That's a fact of U.S. public education. You were talking about teaching people with disadvantage the same as everyone else. That's not even true. We treat them worse. Once a child comes to school with disadvantages, we give them more disadvantages. I'll be glad to say that. By second grade, we track children basically by test scores that are a reflection of their home life, and most people stay in the same track they're put in second grade throughout their lives. I think that's criminal. I think it's the worst thing that we do. So I would say I don't care about tenure. Tenure doesn't matter in South Carolina. Easy to say for a professor with tenure. But professor tenure and K-12 tenure are completely different things. But I do think we have a real problem with the good old boy system. And what we should be doing in South Carolina is we should be identifying the best teachers, the most experienced teachers, because there's a correlation between experience and being a good teacher. And we should be putting them in the classrooms with students who are struggling the most, and we should make sure those classrooms are small.
I'd like to chime in on something. You talked about the ranking of South Carolina being at the low. I think it's also important to indicate that South Carolina has a very stringent grading scale compared to some of the other states. And I dealt with this just the past couple of days in a college admission process in one state I won't name, in the college I won't name. But for a student here in South Carolina, if you have all straight, not A's, but B's, 90 average, you're considered a 3.0 student, a B. But if you're in Georgia, perhaps Alabama, you're considered a 4.0 student, and 90 above is an A. So how do we address that inequity in terms of grading in the college admission process? Is the one thing I wanted to mention. Talking about teachers in the classroom, we have to have people that have passion. I poll my students every time we tour colleges, and I ask this question on unidentifiable surveys. They don't have to put the names on it. And one of the profound things that they state constantly, we want people that care about us. And when a child knows that you genuinely care and are concerned about his or her well-being, then they begin to open up and receive the information that you want to impart to them.
I just want to clarify that not tenure, but our returning teachers automatically get continuation contracts. So it may not be the same as tenure, but they're automatically rolled over into the next year into continuation contracts. Each year we get a notebook, yay, said, with the contracts for each teacher in the district as a continuation.
Okay, all right, thank you. Lee, my next question is going to be directed towards you. With the Hispanic community, and one of the things that teachers face is the language barrier. All right, how do we begin to break this down? Because I've seen a lot of times where parents come in, the child has to be the mediator between the two. All right, so how do we begin to break that down? Because some schools may not have a Spanish-speaking person on site. How do we begin to change that? Because I think it hurts not only the classroom and that child, but the family as a whole. Because the parent kind of only understands part of what's going on from a 5-year-old, trying to explain what the teacher is saying in order to help them. So how do we begin to change that mode? I know you're talking about ESOL and things like that. How can we really begin to help change that in the
I'm
classroom?
so glad you mentioned that, because that is something that is so, it happens so much within our school district here, where they are using students to be interpreters for the student and the teacher. And let me just quickly give you a lesson, the difference between interpreting and translating. Interpreting is oral, translating is written. Okay? So think about, if you're going to interpret and the teacher's saying, yeah, you're not doing good in class, what are you going to tell your mom? Okay? Think about that. So it's very unethical to have a student interpreting for the teacher, okay, in that type of situation. And that happens, but I will say we did a survey in 2008, 2009, 2010, we sent out to all the schools in South Carolina to address that issue. What were schools doing? And as you know, schools in the rural areas have more challenges in terms of finding people to interpret or even translate the materials for students that are being enrolled in the schools that have language barriers. And unlike the myth that the Latino family or Hispanic family does not get involved in education, that is a myth. The fact is that Hispanic families value education tremendously. In fact, they uphold the teacher very high. Like a doctor, a lawyer, they say what the teacher usually says, that's what goes. So keep that in mind in terms of how we value education and in terms of how we're talking about achievement gaps. But what we did see across the state is, yes, we have a shortage on ESOL teachers, okay, because not all schools have ESOL teachers, meaning that then now a student may have to travel farther to get the help that he or she needs, okay? And then the Hispanic student, think about this, you have a language barrier. So now you are learning all of your core classes at the same time that you're learning the language, making it even more difficult. So if you never have a good base in terms of reading, literacy is a problem, then what's going to happen the older that you get? the more challenges you face. Because if you don't have a solid source there for reading, so what's happening is that we don't have enough teachers to help these students that need that extra help so that they can achieve. Is it that they're not smart? No. They're having to work double because they're learning the language and also learning another course. And what we found is that the problem with the SOL not having enough teachers, not having enough interpreters is an issue. However, we have places like Greenville, Spartanburg. Some of the schools are model schools in terms of what they're doing working with the Hispanic families. They have developed their own resources. They include the Latino families in with the PTA or PTOs, I don't know what you call them. So they're doing excellent things. I think a big gap truly is within the rural areas, trying to find enough people to be part of and assist with these challenges that we face because of the language barrier.
All right, we're gonna keep moving right down the line. My next question is for you, Richard, dealing with Greenville Tech. And we know one thing about retention rates. How is Greenville Tech trying to get the retention rate up and keep it at a certain level, dealing with minorities, whether it be minority males, as you deal with the Calling Mr. program, things of that nature? How are they trying to keep that retention rate up? Because we know a lot of times students come that first semester, get that first financial aid check, and we don't see it. Y'all know about those checks. Y'all know y'all look for them.
Which is due Friday,
Yeah.
by the way. One of the things that we started this year is GT Cares, and we have actually targeted a number of faculty and staff that we have created a mentor type program for especially the first year students, the first year experience students. We have targeted, like I have about 15 students on my list that I actually keep up with, call, talk to from time to time. And with the African American students, I do an extra thing with the African American males, and trying to mentor them, to keep up with them. Like Ms. Robinson said, they come with a lot of baggage, a lot of problems from home, whatever. But I think what has helped us this year is the mentor piece.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna keep going down. Next is Pernita, correct? Okay. We were talking earlier about living, I guess, in a rural area and not having the same advantages when you came here to Furman. How do you, after your experience, how do you go back home and address those same issues and let that same child know that you have the same opportunities that I had? And coming to Furman is, for some people, maybe a culture shock because people don't look like you. How do we begin to get other young people to realize, don't dummy down who you are just to be friendly in high school? Because we all know the cool people in high school are no longer cool. You know, we always had them like, oh, they had everything in high school. They were the ones, everybody wanted to be their friend. Now, 10 years later, a couple of years later, we look at those same people now, and they're the same ones doing nothing. We call them bums, and we're like, man, I would have never expected that from you. So how do we begin to address that, especially as young people, because I'm passionate about that. I tell my boys all the time, don't dummy down and worry about Jordans and stuff, because I'm telling you, when you get older, you'll be like, man, I did over Jordans. And then it's going to be like, what do you do? So how do we go back home and begin to change that mode?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to do once I graduated from Furman, but because of the politics and in high school and trying to get involved, I wanted to start a pilot program at my old high school to where I could be able to use my experience coming from Collins County, saying that I did the same thing that you did. I went to school, you can do it, try to encourage them to go to school. But once I go home and I have these conversations with those cool kids who had everything, I just kind of let things go with it, because I can't, that's one thing I can't control, because they had the same opportunity. We were in the same class, we had the same teacher. I think one thing I did do was try to encourage them. I continue to ask them questions on what you plan on doing. Okay, this is what you're doing, what you're going to do next to get yourself out of it. That's working with my age group, but kids younger than me, to them and say, I basically give them my information, say, if you want to talk, let me know. I let them know college application process. There's people in my church. I just basically make myself open and talk to them. That's all I can do.
All right. Dr. Paul, coming from the high school setting to college, and we know one of the things that's been, I guess, very popular recently, charter schools, then the voucher system. What are your thoughts about charter schools? We know we have some charter schools that are bad, some that are good, versus the whole public system. Because we know once it comes to certain things, kids start having to apply. So if you don't get in, you know, I think it's sad that our parents and children have to go to a school trying to apply for education that's supposed to be free. So, you know, if I want to go to the school and I have to apply, I got to go 30 miles away, and if I don't get in, I don't get elected, then what do I do? So what are your thoughts about that? Coming from that sector now in college, how can we begin to change the mold? I mean, what needs to happen as an overhaul for children not have to go and be a number to get into a school?
The charter school concept began as experimental public schools. And in that form, it didn't flourish very well, and I actually think that's a good idea. Because the original idea of a charter school was to release it from some of the restrictions of public schools. What's happened recently is charter schools have been taken over by corporate entities. The one that's most popular is KIPP, Knowledge is Power program. You'll hear it referred to as KIPP. And that movement is real troubling. One of the things that's troubling about it is several studies have come out in the last few years that the corporate charter school movement is resegregating public schools. These charter schools are almost completely monolithic in race and socioeconomic class. So it's resegregating our schools. That's the worst thing. There's some recent research too. DiCarlo at the Shaker blog does statistical analysis. And one thing that we know is whether you're looking at public schools, private schools, or charter schools, the kind of school delivery makes almost no difference. In other words, charterness or publicness or privateness, that is not making a difference. So people that are saying we need more charter schools are misrepresenting what charter schools can and cannot do. Most studies show that charter schools, public schools, and private schools are essentially the same because their quality is a reflection of the status of the students who go to the schools. So we probably, in my opinion, we need to quit focusing on those options. I think the options are getting in the way. And I think what we do need to do is to overhaul the public school system. We need to commit, we need to recommit, or commit to begin with, I don't know that we ever committed to it, to the public school system, and then we need to rethink the public school system. You made the point a minute ago, our school system is antiquated. And there's many things we could do in the school system. My biggest one would be to stop leveling students. We should quit labeling them, and we should quit ranking them, and we should quit sorting them. A little thing like that so that they all start with some equity, even though their lives are going to be inequitable, would be a big change.
All right. William, I heard you talk about taking some college students on different tours. I had a student call me this past week, very upset. They go to a private school that's predominantly a white institution. How do you get your students to look past that? Because oftentimes what I see is young people who feel like the only fair opportunity sometimes they get in admissions to an HBC. This young man told me that people didn't even give him a brochure when he came on campus to apply. So he said, you know what, they basically told me they don't even want me to apply to the school. Now he's on the campus for a tour. And he basically said they didn't even want me to apply because they didn't give me a brochure. How can we keep our young people motivated to still look past that and still apply maybe even to that college or other colleges? Because what I see is sometimes a broken spirit. So sometimes, you know, they don't have the parent behind them saying, you know what, keep going. Look past that. You know, this is your education. How are you working with your young people to have them look past those obstacles, if you will, that sometimes occur when they're applying for college or whatever may happen in the classroom? How are you addressing those issues?
Kind of a tough question, but I primarily deal with high school students throughout Greenville County. We're fortunate to have a base of about 560 to 600 students a year. and I get to see the gamut of a little bit of everything. Coming from the student who's already labeled the schools to the parent who have somewhat labeled schools, and I have to explain the differences in institutions and universities, why HBCUs exist, why do they occur, why do they exist today, getting them to understand where that niche is, looking at where they are as an individual. Because sometimes I think, and I heard someone talk about guidance counseling earlier, and I didn't go there. I think a lot of times our guidance counselors do our students a disservice because we don't sell them the real world. If I have a child that has bad study habits and progressed primarily through social promotion through high school, it has about a 2.5 GPA, never really took AP courses or college prep or honor classes, that child probably would not do well in a university setting like USC. So it's to take the individual and do an individual assessment or individual college development plan and looking at the testing and say, look, these are places where I think you can fit in. And I try to do tours on 3 different levels. I take a look at those schools that are tough in terms of work and rigid academics, where individuals have to work primarily on their own, to those schools that have a small setting where an individual can get the individualized attention that they need, and maybe the mentoring or the tutoring one-on-one. So I think it's taking a look at the individual and recognizing where they are and selling them on that, and including the parents as a part of that picture.
All right. I'm going to go to another general question for the entire panel. We know that over 70% of our teachers are white females. How do we really begin to address, in your opinion, that situation overall? How can we get other minority components to buy into being teachers, going into education fields? Because some people say that's part of the problem in being able to relate. I know, for instance, I didn't have my first African-American teacher until college. So for some of us, maybe culturally, we don't see the response that is needed, or what have you. So how do we begin to address that situation, in your opinion? Because I think it's one that definitely has to be addressed. Whoever wants to go.
Well, one of the things that we're doing with the Call the Mr. program is trying to get more African-American males into the classroom, which I think is a very good program. Only creates a small dent in changing that that you identified. But the ones that I work with coming through Greenville Tech and then on to the 4-year institutions are very excited about their role and what they want to do and the changes they will bring to the classroom. So I'm very supportive of that type of program because I know it works and I've seen it work.
I grew up here in South Carolina, I know you can't tell. And I just wrote a piece and I just told her. I had 3 African-American teachers and 2 African-American administrators in my long academic career. I can remember every one of them, which in a way is a nice thing, but in another way it's an awful thing. South Carolina is a high minority state, and the United States is seeing a rise in majority minority schools. This is becoming very common in our country. It's common around Furman right now in the local schools in the Berea area. And then the teachers remain primarily female and primarily white. That is certainly a serious problem. The direction we're going, though, where we're going to hold teachers accountable for test scores, we've got prominent people saying we need to do that every year and fire the bottom 25% of teachers. That's not going to do it. We've got to readdress the teaching profession, how we treat them, how we pay them, and how we respect them. Teachers do not want merit pay. When you ask teachers what they want, merit pay is around 19th on their list. It's way down the list. What they want are teaching conditions that allow them to do what they want to do. So I think we've got to readdress how we treat teachers, how we pay teachers, and we've got to address the conditions of the schools themselves. A lot of the schools that need a diversity of teachers have so many problems in the school that almost no one wants to teach there.
As Dr. Parr indicated, you talked about getting more males into the classroom primarily that reflect the population of the school. I think any school, faculty, cadre, whoever you have, should reflect the student population. But I said something jokingly to you, money, pay. Most of the African American males that have the ability and the capacity to go into the classroom refuse to go because it's truly a dueling task, but the money just isn't there. So I think if you increase the pay with some other provided incentives, you start to get some more males into the classroom.
And that's one of the things that Lee and I talked about outside. I told her after my first degree, I was like, I went into education because you're going to be broke. But I'm still a little bit in education, but that's another story. But that's very true. So the problem is, like, you look at it like, I got to take care of my family. I'm looking at this pay, especially South Carolina, you be like, $35,000 a year. I can't even pay my student loans. Like, you just looking like, that's not going to work. That's one of the true things. And Lee, I'm going to come back to you. I'm dealing with Hispanic youth here in South Carolina. How can we, in South Carolina, begin to fix that mold? Because we know that every probably week or so, students are coming in and out of schools. They're moving, their families are moving, and everything like that. In South Carolina, what can we do? Because you talk about the rural areas, but we know one of the things about the rural schools is all about that dollar. They don't have the finances. So, Greenville, Spartanburg, we get the money up here in upstate. And I know, but when we go to the lower part, we see the money, disparities. It's just not there from Columbia on down. It's not there. So what can we do as an entire state, in your opinion, to begin to help the Hispanic community, but also that whole, we talk about achievement gap? Like, how can we begin to do it without the finances, if you will?
Without the resources. It's very difficult. And I want to say this, and just so that it gives you all something to think about. We're using the term Hispanic student and generalizing, but keep in mind we have different challenges among different Hispanic students, okay? And if it's okay, if I can point this out because it's very important. When you talk about the challenge or the achievement gap with a Hispanic student, which we call Hispanic American, was born here and their parents have lived here, they may be of Hispanic heritage but have lived here all of their life, and the student's born here, he may be Hispanic. The challenges are going to be completely different than a student that has been either born here, but their parents are immigrants, they're foreign born, and have language barriers and challenges. You follow me? So that's two different kinds. Then what can also happen is that you have a student that was born foreign born, they come here, and both parents, of course, are not, born here. So you have that other set of Hispanic students, okay? So we can't, there's unique challenges on with each one, okay? So when we're talking here, we're talking kind of general, talking about the language barrier, but not all are going to fall under the same category in terms of achievement gap. And the question, going back to the question, what can we do? I think it's more so a mindset within the school. If we put aside the funding, as I mentioned earlier, and the resources, there is so much research that has been shown from the schools, from either elementary, high school, and even college. The achievement, the final achievement of that student depends on the mindset of those that are providing the service. And really and truly, like you said, if somebody has a passion in helping that student, in building them and helping them, then they're going to be, you're going to see different results and successes. But within our state, for right now, our resources are very limited. And we really need to seriously look at this because I don't know if you all know, but South Carolina ranks #1 among all states in Hispanic growth. Okay? So keeping that in mind, that tells you that our school systems are growing in terms of our Hispanic students, okay? And also for college enrollment, between last year and this year, the highest enrollment rate was among the Hispanic students. We enrolled 329,000 across the nation. And in the white community, it went in the minus, 300 and something thousand. And the African American was the next highest, 88,000. The problem being is having them finish and succeeding. They're enrolling, but they're not graduating. Okay, so that once again is the other key gap. And it all comes to also in how the colleges and schools can relate to that student and engage them in actually completing.
Right. And one thing about enrollment, one of the things that President Obama is talking about now, you cannot drop out, I think, until the age of 18. So we'll keep our eyes on that as well and how that turns out. Panita, I'm gonna come back to you. You talked about political science and policy. How, in your mind, in 2012, what would you do in a policy, if I say, you know what, I'm going to give you the overall policy making of education, what would you do and what would you like to see as far as policies being made by minority students that would really impact them? One of the things we talked about earlier was, you know, the arts. We're losing the arts, things like that because of budget cuts. What is something in your mind that would stick out that would really be able to help?
Not just for the African American community, but just in general, I definitely would extend the school day, or extend the school year. I really am adamant because of that, because of, again, I feel as though if I had more time in class or being able to have a better understanding of my world, I would be more informed of going into school. I think another thing too is policy-wise is I really don't understand the teacher-faculty type the meetings all the time. I think if we cut back on those meetings so often through the years, so that way teachers won't be given dummy lessons during the class year, and having so many substitutes, I think that would be one thing. And have those meetings during the summer and them having some summer retreats and things of that nature. And then another thing is just resources, trying to probably increase the federal budget and getting those resources towards low-income schools.
All right, I'm gonna jump over to William. One of the things we see that's going on is a lot of our young men are in prison. So we see more young men in prison than we do in college. How maybe is your program addressing those issues, and then maybe overall as communities, how can we begin to get our young people, especially our young men, to see the importance of not a lifestyle that they see on BET or MTV, but one that is realistic about being men and not having this mindset of, I'm gonna do whatever until I die, that's just the way it is. So how can we begin to cause we know, I know it comes with mentoring at home, but you know, how can we begin to hone into some of those things? Because some of us don't have, you know, fathers or true leadership in the home that is indicative of this change. So in your role as a mentor, what are you really pushing to help that change?
That's a loaded question. Makes you really think, because there's so many different barriers that exist in the household today. Over 70% of the African American households are headed by single females. The Scott Foundation report released in October of 2010, commissioned by President Obama, indicates that only 47% of African American males are graduated high school nationwide. Here in South Carolina, it's only 39%. And to add more wood to the fire, in Charleston, it's only 24%. But when we look at the imprisonment rate, those that are in prison today in South Carolina, the numbers are disproportionate. African Americans only represent about 30% of the population in South Carolina, 29.8%. But we represent 65% of those that are in prison. 95% of the prisoners in South Carolina are high school dropouts, and I heard you talk about President Obama looking at extending. That would be a good thing if we could get it to 18, because we're starting to hold people accountable and responsible. And that's our talk to young men. We need to take those of us who have found some level of success and go back, reach back, and begin to mentor at an early age. Plant the seed early. Because by the time young people transition to high school, 14, 15, 16 years of age, they already have a mindset. They're already who they are. I mean, that's proven psychologically. So the only thing you can do is alter behavior. It has to start early. And one of the things I did with professional men, you gotta give back. And it's that one-on-one mentoring that's going to work. That individualized attention, that which they're not getting from that positive male role model. If you don't go back and do it, then we all run the risk of being cracked in the head because they're going to do what they do until I die. And I'm not saying that's the right thing, it's the wrong thing. To us, it may be the wrong thing, but to the person out there that's trying to survive and can't get a job because they drop out of high school and they have 3 or 4 kids to take care of and facing imprisonment, to them, that's violent. To us, it may be breaking the law, but you have to transition, put yourself in that person's position, but mentoring and reaching back and doing things one-on-one and showing people, being real about where you came from. I share with them, I came from a single-parent household. I had a mother that worked in production, making about $120 a week. Was college a reality for me? No. I had to use what was up here, my God-given talent. And I worked my butt to the bone. I drove school bus by day, went to school, flipped burgers at Hardy at night. But because I had a passion and desire to rise above where I was. And I go back and I share that story. And when people begin to see who you were, to where you are now, then they begin to understand and open up. But too many of us are hiding where we came from.
I just want to connect, I think we need to connect the prison statistics with the way children are treated in schools. Nationally, prisons are 10 to 1 male to female. For every 1 female in prison, 10 men are in prison. White males outnumber African American males in the country 5 to 1. In prisons, African American males outnumber white males 6 to 1. Those are dramatic numbers, but if you look at pre-kindergarten expulsion, we expel children in pre-kindergarten, by the way. If you look at pre-kindergarten expulsion, expulsion in kindergarten is 4 to 1 males to females. Of those males, 92% are African American males. We're expelling African American males at a disproportionate rate that is very similar to how we imprison African American males. That's a social problem. There's something wrong with society that is treating a specific group of people disproportionately, both in our culture and in our schools. And a current issue of rethinking schools is on the school to prison pipeline. I highly recommend it if this is interesting to you. But I think one thing our political leaders need to be asked and must address is why is that inequity happening?
And Mr. Mark, I'd like to piggyback on that. I really believe that to save a generation, we must mentor a generation, and we must actively get involved with that. I started a program along with 2 other people in the Malden area and mentoring boys 6 to 12 years old. So I think that's one way that we can try to change it, turn this around.
All right. Ms. Robbins, you want to chime in on that as well?
I did. I think one of the things that we need to do is to speak up loud and clear about the schoolhouse to jailhouse syndrome in our country. Because in the wake of Columbine many years ago, a set of laws were placed on the books that made even non-violent offenses in a school offenses that had to be reported to the solicitor. The students as young as kindergarten can be arrested, fingerprinted, DNA tested. They get a prison record while they're in school, and that predisposes them to future offenses. Many of these students were good kids, horseplay, playing around in the hallway, horse playing. You'll go to family court, you'll go before a judge, and if there are any problems in the family or if the judge is in a bad mood, you may or may not be sent to Union County or down to Columbia for an evaluation. Many of those kids stay down there for 30 days or more for evaluation, and if they weren't a hoodlum when they went down there, when they come back, trust me, their whole personality has changed by that time. I've been in family court so many times pleading with judges to have mercy on some of these kids. I have a little niece who's down at USC now, graduated with honors from Easley High, but she ran to see a fight at Easley High. That was termed disturbing a school. Okay, She had to go to family court. She had to get fingerprinted. She had to get DNA tested for running to see a fight, not being in a fight. So what you do, look at the discipline code for each county, especially Greenville County, and you'll see a host of offenses, non-serious offenses that students are arrested for each day. We need to get rid of that. That needs to stop. I mean, it may have been a knee-jerk reaction to the school shootings, but we need to come back to a more civilized and humane way of treating our precious kids. We say our kids are precious, but they stop being precious once they cross the line. So I think some strong advocacy needs to take place. I've been hollering and screaming about it for years. I think it's criminal. Some of those kids, to teach, I had a lady call me. She had twins, and both of her kids were like good students, A.B. honor roll, sang in the choir, no prior behavior problem. Those kids were arrested on Friday. The family court judge was out of town, and they had to stay at the detention center the whole weekend until that judge came back late Monday. They finally went before a family court judge. The parent couldn't get them out. I mean, in the adult world, someone can go a bond. But there's no such thing as going a bond when you're a kid. And these are very vulnerable kids. I mean, I don't make excuses for the ones that need to be dealt with, you know, in the proper manner. But some of these kids are really being treated in a very uncivilized way.
All right, so here we go, guys. Get a good stretch out. Get it in. Here we go. All right, it's Q&A time. So if you need the mic, just raise your hand. I'll bring the mic to you. If not, project so we can hear you to the front. But this is where it is. So let's get it in. I don't want everybody to be like, oh, I'm scared. Come on. Q&A time. Let's go. I know somebody has a good question to ask. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think the acceleration of the AP program has anything to do with the inequities in schools?
Whoever wants to answer can answer. But we're going to keep it to about a minute and 30, but I'll let you know.
The College Board itself recommends that the AP program be selective. If a school follows the College Board recommendations, then it's a bad thing. I happened to teach for 18 years in a school where we did not follow the College Board recommendations, and we allowed open enrollment. I think AP courses are excellent, and I think IB programs are excellent, but I think they should be open enrollment, and that way everybody would have access.
All right, I was just told that we're going to have one more question, so let's get one more good question in. Yes, ma'am, I see you.
Okay, so you talked about earlier, you said something about the 95 corridor, and you also said something about distributing the bright and passionate teachers. What do you suggest, or what would you think would be, like, I don't know, an incentive to, because I know people are like, the funds are distributed differently according to counties and districts. So do you have a solution in mind, or that would encourage those teachers to move to the schools that need help?
I tell you, the suggestions that I've made in the past almost ignited the Second Civil War. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut. They don't want to go. They do not want to go. You can find some of your better high schools, you know, your Riversides and the like. Those people have been there forever. They're not going. They are not going. You can get down on your knees and beg and plead with them. So I agree with the Department of Education that we need to set up a system where the best and brightest are shared, and it shouldn't be a matter of choice. They work for the school district. They don't work for the school, and they should be placed as needed. And if we set up that type of environment in our schools, then I think the greatness would follow in terms of the products that we would get with the students.
And I want to add to that, pay student loans. Pay off student loans. I think that's a great incentive. With a lot of doctors coming out of medical school for those rural communities, they're using the same program, and it works.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I would just like to say thank you for everyone who came. This is the end of the CLP portion of this event. If you would like to stay and ask questions, our panelists will still be here to answer any questions, but if you have to